Hello everybody, welcome to Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old. And today, as a Patreon request from Rinu Matoba, I'm talking about the 2016 album from Eco, or DJ Eco, Wolves. Okay, finally getting this request done. It's time to talk about some trance. I was not at all familiar with DJ Eco before this request got sent in to me. This artist has no personal connection to me. I've not heard anything of his outside of this one album. Though I do also know that this album is very special to the guy who requested this. He's told me that this project apparently had a similar effect on him emotionally that BT's These Hopeful Machines did. Big part of his life and musical taste. Though he also told me that I shouldn't necessarily go in expecting something on par with These Hopeful Machines. And I didn't. Not that I would've, even if he hadn't told me. I'd be very impressed if somehow an album I'd never heard managed to get a similar reaction out of me that a classic project I've loved since high school would. But whatever, I was still looking forward to hearing what it would be like. And yeah, as it turns out, this is a pretty straightforward, no-nonsense melodic trance album. It's not particularly inventive, it adheres to well-established formulas, but it does all of them well. It does not surprise me that the requester got a really strong emotional reaction out of it. It is most definitely designed to get that reaction out of its listeners. On top of that, I can imagine I probably would have been really into this if, for instance, I discovered it in 2016 when it came out. First of all, it's released on Black Hole Recordings, so it's trying to fit in with the crowd of commercial trance artists like Armin and Tiesto and all those guys. But in 2016, that was the tail end of what I've previously referred to as the Dark Age of Trance. Or I suppose more accurately, the Dark Age of Commercial Trance. Because that was when all the big commercial trance artists were trying out this electro-infused style of trance that made their music flatter, trendier, and more disappointing. There were just so many trash releases from so many trance artists who should have been capable of better. It was, ugh. Well, okay, in 2016 I didn't have as wide a knowledge of commercial trance artists that I do now. I hadn't heard any Paul Van Dyk, or Chicane, or Above and Beyond albums yet, for instance. But point is, if I had been paying more attention at the time and this came out, I would have been like, oh thank God, the flat style is on its way out, we're going back to trance that's actually satisfying to listen to and tries to have some sense of space. Basically, even though I've heard no shortage of projects that sound a lot like this one, it was one that I definitely enjoyed pretty much front to back, and reminded me why I like trance music in general. I mean, my biggest critique with the album is that I don't feel like DJ Eco has a distinctive enough style that I would be able to recognize at a distance. I suppose he does incorporate rock elements and guitars into these tracks more than your everyday trance producer, though not to the same extent as These Hopeful Machines, which went for a loud, blaring pop rock kind of sound in many parts. This is kind of more post-rock-ish, I guess, and it's incorporated more seamlessly into the usual trance formulas and sounds. Again, I've heard it before. For instance, Chicane has a couple of albums that sound a little like this, like Somersaults and Thousand Mile Stare. Wolves does nothing I have not heard before, to some extent. It just happens to do it better than a lot of projects in this style, and it can pretty easily get a pass for its lack of innovation, just on its execution alone. In terms of individual tracks, I don't have interesting things to note about every single track. There's just enough diversity here so that I don't get bored, even with repeat listens, but not so much that it makes for a really dynamic track-by-track breakdown. Like the intro track, Darkness and Delight. I like it a lot. It makes for a great tone setter. It's got a ton of focus on field recordings in the first half, which are cool. But I don't actually have anything else to say about it. Nor do I have much of anything to add to tracks like Dogs, or River Song, or Soar, or Trust in the Wind. Well, River Song has a really strong groove in the beginning that I like. Trust in the Wind is one of the catchiest melodies in the one track here with a co-producer, Drift Moon. But that's it. Now, while this album is mostly instrumental, there's of course a couple of tracks with vocal features. Though not a single one of the features appears in an intrusive way, or really offers a super unique personality. They sound like your average, everyday trance vocal guests. Like all the female singers are trying to fit in that Kirsty Hawkshaw mold, but hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I like Kirsty Hawkshaw. How much I get into any given vocal track, I guess depends on how catchy the melody or hook is. Like The Rain with Araya Noetzel, or however you say her name, for instance, is probably my least favorite of the vocal track since it disappears from my head as soon as it's done, even though I do enjoy it a lot while it's on. And Running featuring Jennifer Renee is catchier, but it kind of has a little sense of a deja vu with its melodies. Both good tracks, but neither were major highlights for me. But there is a little run of 3 vocal tracks in the middle, or 2, depending on whether you count the two-parter as 2 separate tracks. But those tracks are really good. Like, just this album's run from Slow Rising Sun to No Ceilings, unquestionably my favorite part of the album. Slow Rising Sun is relatively simplistic from a lyrical standpoint, but is really easily memorable and easy to get into. Not gonna try to pronounce that singer's name, but she's really good. And it leads seamlessly into the 2 parts of Cloud, which are also quite memorable and stick out not just for being a 2-parter, with the first part being more Robert Miles-ish and trance-heavy, and the second part being a little more rock-heavy. But it's also the one male vocal feature on this album, too. Chris Severe, he's pretty good. He puts in the emotional pathos necessary to make a track like this work. I definitely prefer part 1 over part 2, just has more going on and is more hard-hitting. But yeah, right after those is probably my favorite instrumentals in the bunch. If I Survive, I'll Worship the Moon starts out with all these marimba-ish sounds and repetitive vocal licks, and it builds up and pays off in all the most satisfying ways you'd want out of a trance song. That one is almost certainly my favorite track on the album, and 100% justifies being the longest cut in the bunch as well, at like 8.5 minutes. And No Ceilings is more like a down-tempo instrumental rock tune, with all its reverb-soaked guitars. A track like this was definitely needed to break up the variety of the tracks. If I do have an issue with this track, is that it makes a really abrupt transition into It'll All Make Sense One Day that's pretty jarring. And while I'm at it, that lighter track is probably my least favorite track for being among the most generic sounding in the bunch. Its synth tones get bright and flashy and huge to almost a Steve Aoki level near the end. But again, that one's still perfectly fine. The only other tracks of note are the title track, which is an instrumental I liked for having harmonicas in some parts, and of course the closer, The Lonely Soldier, which opts for a big, epic, slow burn feel for most of it. I almost kind of wish it stayed beatless the whole time. The first half was really powerful, though it also has a switch up into kind of the more usual trance stuff in the second half. But whatever, this track still most definitely has the emotional weight you'd want out of an album closer. So yeah, that's about all I got from an individual track basis for Wolves. Overall, yeah, I had a lot of fun with this thing. If you're looking for an artist who's really trying to push the genre forward and try new stuff that you haven't heard before, this album likely won't do it for you unless you've somehow just completely avoided commercial melodic styles of trance music in general. In which case, well heck, I bet an album like this can help you get into that kind of sound. This is an album that reminded me why I like this kind of straightforward, commercial-ish trance music, and why I even gave artists like Armin and Tiesto a chance in the first place. If this had been out around the time I was in my ATB phase in my freshman year of high school, this likely would have become an easy all-time favorite, just like it has for the guy who requested this, and like for something that Robert Miles' Dreamland did. For 2019 me, Wolves is nothing precisely mind-blowing, having heard no shortage of similar stuff, but it's a rock-solid collection of really well-produced and well-executed trance music, and one of the better albums I've heard in this particular style. Definitely worth a shot, I'd say, even if you don't think it'll be your thing, it might surprise you. I'm overall feeling an 8.3 out of 10. But of course, this is just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters, they're awesome people. You want to add yourself to that list or make me a review, something linked to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.